Marion used to think a home had a heartbeat, something you could hear if you stood still long enough. In the early years, theirs had been loud. The radio humming in the mornings, Victor's laughter bouncing off the walls, the clink of plates, as they ate like people who still liked each other. But lately, the house sounded like a man holding his breath. The generator coughed more than it purred, the ceiling fan squeaked like it was complaining, and even the curtains seemed tired of pretending to dance. Marion moved through rooms the way you move through a place you're cleaning for somebody else, careful, polite, and slightly invisible. She didn't mind work. She had never minded work. What she minded was how Victor looked at her now, like she was a familiar old chair, useful, but not something you brag about to visitors. Some mornings, she caught herself rehearsing a smile in the mirror, not because she was happy, but because the world demanded one, the way it demands NEPA to take light exactly when you need it most. Victor, on the other hand, had become a man who wore confidence like perfume, heavy, loud, and choking. He walked into rooms as if he owned the air, and lately he spoke to Marion as if her opinions were small coins he could toss aside. It wasn't always shouting. Sometimes it was worse. Sometimes it was the casual cruelty of a sigh, the way he could glance at her and make her feel as if she'd aged 10 years in 1 second. If Marion asked a simple question, "Will you be home early?" Victor could reply with a look that said, "Who are you to need me?" And yet, this same Victor could take phone calls in the corner and soften his voice so much it became a different language. Marion had heard that tone before, long ago, when he used to speak to her. Now she heard it, and her stomach tightened the way knots do when you pull them too hard. Still, Marion did not collapse. She had 2 younger children who still needed help with homework and a son, Daniel, away at school, who needed her voice to sound steady whenever he called. So she turned pain into routine. She measured rice. She folded clothes. She cleaned the stove until it shone, as if brightness could convince the house to brighten too. Occasionally, she tried humor, because humor was her way of testing whether Victor still had a human heart under all that pride. "This your phone is now your first wife," she teased one evening, holding out his dinner. "Should I greet it good night too?" Victor didn't laugh. He only took the plate and murmured, "Stop being childish, Marion." And Marion smiled anyway, the kind of smile you wear when you don't want your children to see your disappointment standing naked in the room. Celine arrived in Victor's life the way harm sometimes arrives, polished, confident, and carrying a sweet smell that tries to distract you from the poison underneath. Marion didn't meet Celine at first, not face to face, not properly. She met her through changes. Victor's new perfumes that lingered on his shirts, the sudden interest in Jim that left him absent at odd hours, the way he began dressing like every day was a photo shoot. Marion met Celine through Victor's phone too, those late-night laughs, the sudden pauses when Marion entered the room, the quick flipping of the screen, as if secrets were simply apps you could close. When Marion asked questions, Victor responded with the defensive anger of a man who hates being watched. "Are you a policewoman?" he snapped once. "Must you investigate everything?" Marion almost laughed then, not because it was funny, but because a husband acting like a criminal always thinks the wife is the one doing too much. The first time Celine's name became real was on a Tuesday afternoon, when Victor's phone rang while he was in the shower. Marion didn't intend to pick it up. She wasn't looking for trouble. Trouble had already rented a room in the house and stopped paying rent. But the ringtone kept ringing, bold and insistent, and Marion's hands moved on their own. The caller ID said Celine, as if diamonds could make bad behavior sparkle. Marion stared at it for a moment, then let it ring out. When Victor came out, towel around his waist, he saw the missed call, and his face changed, just a flicker, but Marion caught it. "Who is Celine?" she asked calmly, though her heart was thumping like it wanted to jump out and run away first. Victor's eyes sharpened. "Why are you touching my phone?" he demanded, turning the question into a shield. Marion raised an eyebrow. "So it's not Celine you want to explain, it's my fingerprints you're angry about?" Victor hissed, "You're always looking for problems." Marion almost replied, "No, Victor, problems are looking for me, and they have your face." Over the next weeks, Celine became bolder, not because Marion welcomed her, but because Victor's behavior invited her in like an honored guest. Victor stopped hiding his calls. He began stepping outside to answer, but not far enough. Marion could still hear the laughter, the softness, the intimacy that used to belong to their home. Sometimes Marion heard Celine's voice faintly, bright and sharp like the sound of a spoon scraping a pot. Marion told herself she would not become the kind of woman who fights for a man who wants to escape. Still, there were moments, small, humiliating moments, when she wanted to stand in front of Victor and shake him like a stubborn radio until the right station returned. Instead, she focused on her children, on her work, on her dignity. And whenever she needed to breathe, she would whisper to herself, half prayer, half warning. Some people don't know they are digging a grave until they fall into it. It happened on a Saturday, because Saturday is when the world is awake enough to witness your shame. Marion had gone out earlier to buy groceries, determined to stock the kitchen like a woman who still believed in feeding a family, even if the family had started starving her emotionally. The sun was bright, and the neighborhood was doing its usual weekend performance. Children shouting, radios competing, women calling out greetings across fences like friendly megaphones. Marion returned with 2 heavy bags, her wrapper tied firmly, sweat gathering at her hairline. She was thinking about dinner, something warm, something comforting, because Marion still tried to cook peace into the pot even when peace refused to stay. As she approached the gate, she saw Victor's car parked oddly, angled like it had arrived in a hurry. Her stomach tightened. But she told herself not to assume. Assuming, she had learned, was a quick way to confirm your worst fear. Then Celine stepped out of the car, not sneaking, not hesitating. Celine came out as if she was stepping onto a stage. Her sunglasses sat on her nose like arrogance. Her dress hugged her body like it had signed a contract, and her lips were painted the kind of red that shouted even when she was silent. Marion froze, groceries in hand, while Victor got out too, calm, unbothered, almost proud. Celine looked around the compound, taking it in as if she was inspecting property. Marion's mind raced. Victor brought her here? To our house? In daylight? Her mouth opened, but no words came immediately. Some shock-steel language first. Marion finally managed, Victor. What is this? Victor's face hardened, like he had prepared his excuses and decided he didn't need them anymore. I'm bringing someone to see me, he replied, and the casual cruelty of it landed like a slap. Marion shifted her weight, bags digging into her fingers. In this house? She asked, voice shaking despite her effort. Celine smirked, the kind of smile that says, I win, even when the game is wicked. What happened next was so fast that Marion only remembered it later, like a slow replay. She stepped slightly forward, not to fight, not to shout, just to stand her ground. But Victor's impatience flared. He reached out and shoved her to the side, not a gentle move, not a please pass, but a push that carried contempt, the way you push aside a door that is in your way. Marion stumbled. The grocery bag tore. Tomatoes rolled onto the ground like red shame, bouncing and scattering as neighbors glanced over. Marion's breath caught. For a second she thought she might fall, but she caught herself, because Marion had been catching herself for years. Celine's smirk widened. Victor didn't even look concerned. Instead, he barked, Marion, stop standing there like a statue. You want to embarrass me outside. Marion stared at him, stunned by the irony. Embarrass you? The neighbor's eyes were hot on her skin. Marion's ears rang. And still, Marion did not scream. She bent down slowly, one tomato at a time, gathering them like pieces of her dignity from the dust. In that moment, Marion understood something that hurt more than the push. Victor had stopped seeing her as a person. He had reduced her to an obstacle, something blocking the path to his new excitement. And Marion, kneeling in the dirt, picking up tomatoes while her husband stood tall beside a Sidechick, made a quiet decision. Not a dramatic vow, not a loud threat, just a silent sentence in her heart. I will not die in this house while I am still alive. She didn't know yet how she would leave, when she would leave, or what it would cost. She only knew the cost of staying had become too expensive. And somewhere beyond the gate, hidden by the noise of the neighborhood, a pair of eyes had witnessed everything. Daniel had pictured his surprise visit differently. In his mind, it was going to be soft and sweet, his mother's delighted shout, the younger ones jumping on him. His father acting proud and doing that stubborn man thing where he pretends he isn't emotional, but still offers money for anything you want. Daniel came home early because he missed them. University life was loud, hungry, and demanding. He wanted the comfort of home, even if only for a weekend. He carried a small bag, and as he approached the street, he already imagined the smell of stew, the sound of his mother's voice, the way she always asked too many questions at once. He wanted to tease her. "Mummy, relax, I'm not disappearing." He wanted to laugh. He wanted peace. But the closer he got, the more he sensed something off. There was a cluster of neighbors' attention aimed at his compound the way people stare at a car accident, pretending they are not staring. Daniel reached the gate and stopped. He saw his mother in the dust, picking up tomatoes like she was gathering scattered pride. He saw his father standing, expression sharp and impatient. And then he saw Celine, beautiful, bold, shameless, standing like a queen in someone else's home. Daniel's body went cold. It wasn't just anger. It was disbelief that slapped first. For a moment he thought his eyes were lying, that the sun was playing tricks. But the scene didn't change. His mother's hands were trembling. His father's voice was loud enough for Daniel to catch fragments. "Stop embarrassing me." Celine's laugh was quiet but cutting, the kind of laugh that doesn't respect anyone's pain. Daniel's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He wanted to rush in, to grab his mother, to shout at his father, to throw Celine's arrogance back into her face. But something stopped him, not fear exactly. More like a sudden understanding that if he entered that compound in that moment, he might do something he couldn't undo. So Daniel did the strangest thing. He stepped back. He turned away from the gate and walked down the street like a man who had been slapped but refused to flinch in public. His hands were clenched, so tight his knuckles hurt. He walked until he reached a small junction and sat on the edge of a gutter, staring into space while the world moved around him like nothing had happened. His mind replayed the scene again and again. He remembered the woman his mother used to be, laughing, lively, always finding ways to make hardship feel lighter. He remembered her waking up early to pack his lunch for school, rubbing his head and praying over him. He remembered her shielding them from the worst parts of their parents' arguments. And now he had seen her reduced to picking tomatoes from dust while his father stood tall and careless. Daniel's throat burned. He swallowed hard, trying to keep himself steady. If he cried, he knew he might turn the pain inward. And Daniel refused to hurt himself when the real enemy was clear. That night, Daniel didn't go home. He went to his friend's place, one of those cramped bachelor rooms where the fan blows hot air and the mattress complains with every move. His friend asked questions, but Daniel only shook his head, too raw to explain. He lay down and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sound of distant music and motorcycles outside. He didn't sleep properly. Every time his eyes closed, he saw his mother's hands in the dust. In the darkness, Daniel made a vow, not the kind people shout about on social media, not the kind that needs applause. It was quiet, personal, and dangerous. Tomorrow we fix this. Not with talk, not with patience, not with begging. We fix it so my father never forgets what he did. And somewhere in the same night, in the same house Daniel avoided, Marion lay awake too, silent, exhausted, and unaware that her son's love was turning into something fierce. Marion stayed in her room, like someone protecting a wound from dirty hands. She could hear Victor moving around the house, the low murmur of his voice when he made calls, the careless way he dropped his keys as if the walls should be grateful he returned. She did not rush out to greet him. She did not demand explanations. Her silence was not weakness, it was control. Some women shouted when they were hurt, but Marion had learned that shouting in a house like this only fed cruelty. She answered the younger children gently through the door when they asked if she would eat, telling them later, because she did not want them to see the crack in her strength. She lay on her bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the fan complain, realizing that the push she had received earlier was not a mistake, but a summary. A single careless movement that captured years of growing disregard. In that stillness, She understood with painful clarity that something inside her had finally gone quiet, not because she was defeated, but because she was done explaining herself to someone committed to misunderstanding her. Memories came in waves, uninvited and heavy. She remembered Victor when he was younger, when hunger still softened him, when he used to call her my backbone, with sincerity in his eyes. She remembered building a life from scraps, counting money late at night, choosing children's needs over new clothes, wearing the same slippers year after year, because next month will be better. She remembered labor pains that split her open and love that stitched her back together. Remembered nights she stayed awake nursing sick children while Victor slept, exhausted from a job she had quietly supported with her own sacrifices. Marion had never kept records of what she gave. She had believed marriage itself was the record. Now her mind laid each sacrifice before her like receipts she could no longer ignore. A bitter humor brushed her thoughts. How a man could consume a woman's years like a full meal, wipe his mouth, and still complain that the food lacked salt. When Victor knocked on her door, his impatience carried authority he no longer deserved. "Marion, open this door," he said, as if marriage were a command. She opened it just enough to look at him, his face already hardened against accountability. "Why are you behaving like this?" he asked, offended that her pain existed at all. Marion considered shouting, considered listing every wound, every humiliation, every silent endurance. Instead, she chose restraint. "I'm tired," she said quietly, the truth sitting plainly between them. Victor scoffed, dismissing her exhaustion as drama, and that dismissal sealed something permanent. Marion closed the door gently, the soft click sounding louder than an argument. Later that night, she gathered her documents with steady hands, checked the small savings she had built quietly over time, and sent Daniel a simple message. "How are you, my son?" unaware that he had already seen everything. As darkness settled, Marion whispered a tired prayer into the room, not for revenge, but for clarity, strength, and the courage to walk away without begging ever again. Victor woke up the next morning with the careless confidence of a man who believed storms passed simply because he had slept through them. Marion did not come out of the room to serve breakfast. The younger children ate quietly, exchanging looks the way children do when adults are pretending nothing is wrong. Victor noticed the absence, but instead of concern, irritation rose in him like bad fuel. He muttered about attitude and women who enjoy playing victim, shaking his head as if Marion's pain were an inconvenience deliberately scheduled to annoy him. In his mind, the push from yesterday had already been reduced to nothing more than misunderstanding. After all, she hadn't fallen. She hadn't screamed. The neighbors had not intervened. To Victor, silence meant forgiveness, and forgiveness meant permission to continue. Celine arrived later that afternoon, not through the front gate this time, but by parking nearby and walking in as if she were trying to appear modest, without understanding the concept. She perched on the edge of the sofa like someone testing furniture that wasn't hers, scanning the house with visible discomfort. "Your wife didn't greet me yesterday," she said, attempting humor, but her eyes darted toward Marion's closed door. Victor scoffed. "She'll come around," he replied dismissively. "She always does." The certainty in his voice was loud, almost defensive. Celine smiled thinly, but something about the house unsettled her. The walls felt heavy, like they remembered things. Even the air felt judgmental. Celine laughed awkwardly and joked that the place felt like an old courtroom. Victor laughed too, but his laugh was forced, the kind that tries to overpower a thought you don't want to entertain. Victor moved around the house that day like a king reclaiming territory. He opened Marion's wardrobe without permission, criticized the food left on the stove, complained loudly about negative energy. He wanted a reaction. He wanted Marion to emerge and argue so he could feel important again. But Marion stayed silent, and that silence frustrated him more than any shouting match ever had. By evening, Victor found himself unsettled, pacing, checking his phone unnecessarily. He didn't know it yet, but the house had already stopped responding to his authority. And somewhere beyond the walls, his eldest son was already on his way home, not with hope, but with purpose. Daniel arrived in the city under cover of evening, carrying nothing but a small bag and a heart too full to be light. He didn't call ahead. He didn't announce himself. He took a taxi and sat quietly, watching streetlights flash past like witnesses who didn't care. His mind replayed the image of his mother in the dust again and again until it hardened into something solid. Anger, when it matures, stops shouting and starts calculating. Daniel wasn't looking for drama. He wasn't coming to talk things out. He was coming because respect had been violated, and silence would have made him an accomplice. He remembered all the times his mother had told him, "Walk away from trouble." This time, walking away had already failed. He spent the night at a friend's place again, not because he was afraid of his father, but because he wanted clarity. Daniel needed to confront Victor with a clean mind, not a reckless one. His friend noticed how quiet he was and tried to lighten the mood with jokes about girlfriends and school stress. But Daniel only smiled faintly. He wasn't in that world anymore. He lay awake on the mattress, staring at the ceiling, remembering childhood moments. His father's voice used to sound strong, commanding in a way that felt safe. Somewhere along the way, that strength had soured into entitlement. Daniel wondered how a man could build a family with his hands, and then use those same hands to push it away. The thought made his jaw tighten. By morning, Daniel was calm. Not peaceful. Calm in the way the ocean looks calm before it swallows a ship. He ironed his clothes carefully, choosing simplicity over drama. He checked his phone. A message from Marion blinked on the screen. "How are you, my son?" Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. That single sentence did more damage to Victor's future than any insult ever could. Daniel replied simply, "I'm fine, Mom. I'm coming home." And when he stepped outside into the morning sun, he walked like someone who had already decided how the story would turn. Daniel entered the house mid-morning, quietly enough that the younger children didn't immediately notice him. Marion was still in her room. Celine was in the living room, pretending comfort while sitting stiffly, her handbag clutched like a shield. Victor looked up from his phone and froze for half a second, just long enough for Daniel to notice. That pause told Daniel everything. "Good morning, Dad," Daniel said evenly, placing his bag down. Victor recovered quickly, forcing a casual smile. "When did you arrive?" he asked, as if nothing in the world was wrong. Daniel shrugged. "Yesterday." Celine shifted uncomfortably. There was something about Daniel's tone, respectful but firm, that unsettled her. It wasn't fear yet. It was anticipation. Daniel did not greet Celine, not out of rudeness, but out of intention. He went straight to Marion's room and knocked softly. When Marion opened the door and saw him, her composure cracked for just a moment. She pulled him into a tight embrace, the kind that says "I survived," but barely. Daniel said nothing. He didn't need explanations. Her silence told him more than words ever could. When he stepped back into the living room, something about him had shifted. Victor felt it immediately, even if he couldn't name it. The air grew heavier, like before rain. Daniel finally spoke. "Dad, I want to ask you something." Victor nodded, irritation flickering beneath his forced calm. "Go on." Daniel looked him straight in the eye. "Did you push my mother yesterday?" The question landed cleanly, without shouting, without insult. Celine inhaled sharply. Victor laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Is that what she told you?" he scoffed. "I barely touched her. You know how your mother exaggerates." That sentence was the mistake, the exact wrong thing. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He simply nodded slowly, the way people do when they've confirmed something painful. "So you're saying she lied?" Victor waved his hand. "I'm saying you children like drama." And in that moment, Victor unknowingly crossed the final line. Daniel stepped closer, his voice still calm, still controlled, which somehow made it more dangerous. "You raised us to respect women," he said. "You taught us that a man who cannot protect his family has failed." Victor's face hardened. "Don't lecture me in my own house," he snapped. Celine shifted again, inching subtly away, sensing the temperature change. Daniel continued anyway. "Yesterday, you pushed my mother in public. Not in anger. Not by accident. You moved her aside like she didn't matter." Victor's jaw clenched. "Watch your tone," he warned. Daniel almost smiled. My tone is the only thing still respectful in this room. Victor stood up, towering, trying to reclaim dominance, the way insecure men always do, with posture instead of reason. You think you're a man now, because you're in school, he sneered. You're still a boy living under my roof. That was when Celine made her own fatal error. Laughing nervously, she said, You should calm down. Adults are talking. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Daniel turned his gaze toward her for the first time, and Celine immediately regretted opening her mouth. There was no threat in his eyes, only finality. She looked away. Victor, emboldened by his own arrogance, added, Your mother likes playing the victim. I'm tired of her drama. The room went quiet. Even the children had stopped moving. Daniel took a slow breath, nodding once, as if ticking off the last item on a list. That's all I needed to hear, he said softly. And Victor, still drunk on misplaced authority, had no idea that the conversation phase of his life had officially ended. What followed was not chaos, it was control. Daniel moved with precision, not rage, and that terrified Victor more than shouting ever could. The confrontation turned physical, swift and overwhelming, stripping Victor of the authority he had worn like armor. Victor tried to fight back, but fear makes men clumsy. Celine screamed and stumbled backward, knocking into a chair as she scrambled away, her confidence dissolving into panic. The neighbors would later hear raised voices, but no one intervened. Some lessons are private, even when they echo. When it was over, Victor was no longer standing tall. He sat on the floor, breath uneven, eyes wide, not with pain alone, but with shock. Daniel crouched slightly so their eyes met. His voice was low, steady, unforgettable. You will never touch my mother again, he said. You will never speak to her like she is nothing. And if I hear even once that you tried it again, I will not stop myself. There was no shouting, no threat exaggerated for drama, just a promise delivered calmly. Victor nodded frantically. He believed him. Celine watched from the doorway, shaking, her hands trembling so badly she dropped her phone. That night, Victor packed in silence. Not angrily, not proudly, like a man escaping a house that had rejected him. Celine refused to step back inside, standing outside and whispering that the place felt cursed, that she never wanted to see it again. Victor didn't argue. Fear had stripped him of pride. As the car drove away, Marion stood at the window, Daniel beside her, neither of them celebrating, neither of them grieving. The house was quiet, not the suffocating quiet of before, but the calm that follows a storm when destruction has passed and survival has been confirmed. The morning after Victor fled did not arrive with celebration. It arrived quietly, cautiously, like a visitor unsure whether it was welcome. Marion woke early out of habit and lay still for a long time, listening. No heavy footsteps, no irritated sighs, no voice asserting ownership over the air. The silence felt different now, not tense, not threatening, but wide and unfamiliar, like a cleared field after years of weeds. When Marion finally rose from bed, she noticed small things she had stopped noticing long ago. How the curtains let in gentle light, how the floor felt cooler under her feet, how the house itself seemed to have relaxed its shoulders. She moved through the room slowly, half expecting Victor's voice to rise from somewhere, but it never did. And for the first time in years, Marion allowed herself to breathe deeply, without fear of interruption. Daniel stayed close that day, not hovering, not policing, just present. He helped with small tasks without being asked, fixed a loose hinge, rearranged chairs Celine had shifted carelessly. At one point, he joked lightly that the house looked as if it had survived a bad tenant and needed fumigation. Marion laughed despite herself, a short sound that surprised them both. It had been a long time since laughter didn't feel like betrayal of pain. The younger children sensed the shift too. They moved more freely, spoke louder, asked questions without whispering. Marion watched them carefully, realizing that peace does not announce itself. It shows up quietly and waits to be noticed. That evening, Marion sat alone in the living room, something she had avoided for years because it had never truly been hers. She traced the arms of the sofa, remembering how Celine had perched there like a conqueror. The memory no longer hurt, It felt distant, almost absurd. Marion smiled faintly and shook her head. So this is what it feels like when fear leaves a room, she thought. Outside, the compound was quiet. Inside, the house finally belonged to those who respected it. Victor discovered very quickly that running does not equal escape. The hotel room Celine insisted on felt cramped despite its size, the walls closing in as if judging him. Victor lay awake most of the night, jumping at small sounds, footsteps in the corridor, a door slamming somewhere, even his own phone vibrating. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Daniel's face, not angry, not shouting, just certain. Fear clung to Victor in a way he had never known. This was not the fear of loss or embarrassment. This was the fear of consequence. The kind that changes posture, that teaches humility without asking permission. Celine, on the other hand, had not slept at all. She sat on the edge of the bed, hugging her knees, replaying the scene again and again. The house, Daniel's voice, Victor's collapse, none of it fit the fantasy she had signed up for. She had expected drama. Yes, but the entertaining kind, raised voices, maybe a jealous wife, maybe tears she could mock later. What she got instead was a boundary enforced with terrifying clarity. When Victor tried to reassure her that things would settle, Celine snapped. Settle how? She demanded. That boy looked at you like you were nothing. That house is not safe. Victor didn't argue. For the first time, he had no argument prepared. By morning, Celine made her decision clear. I'm not going back there, she said firmly, already packing her bag. Not to collect anything. Not ever. She spoke as if the house were haunted, as if stepping into it again might invite disaster. Victor nodded, swallowing hard. The irony burned. The same house he once ruled now terrified both him and the woman he humiliated his wife for. Celine left shortly after, citing space and time, promises Victor recognized as polite exits. He sat alone on the bed afterward, staring at nothing, realizing that fear had stripped him of far more than comfort. It had stripped him of illusion. Marion did not announce her next steps. She simply began moving differently. She woke with purpose. She dressed with intention. She no longer checked her phone anxiously or waited for permission to exist. When neighbors greeted her, she returned their greetings calmly, her chin lifted, her eyes steady. Some of them had seen the humiliation. All of them noticed the transformation. There was a quiet dignity in the way Marion carried herself now, as though she had set something heavy down and straightened her back afterward. Gossip tried to circle, but Marion starved it of oxygen by refusing to perform pain. She visited a lawyer midweek, not dramatically, not with tears, just facts, dates, clarity. The lawyer listened carefully, nodding, occasionally raising an eyebrow at Victor's audacity. Marion found the professionalism comforting. This was not a shouting match, it was a process. She signed papers with steady hands, surprising herself with how light she felt afterward. Leaving the office, she bought roasted corn from a roadside vendor and laughed quietly when it burned her fingers. So this is how life continues, she thought. Ordinary, warm, unapologetic. That night, Marion sat with Daniel and spoke honestly for the first time. She did not scold him. She did not glorify what he did either. She simply thanked him not for the confrontation, but for seeing her. Daniel listened quietly, nodding. I didn't do it because he's my father, he said. I did it because you're my mother. Marion smiled softly. In that moment, she realized something important. She had not raised a violent son. She had raised a man who knew where to stand when respect was tested. The younger children adjusted faster than Marion expected. Children, she realized, recognize peace instinctively. Homework was done without fear of interruption. Meals stretched longer, without tension cutting them short. Even the television volume stayed moderate. No one felt the need to drown out anger anymore. Marion watched them closely, noting how laughter returned naturally, not forced. One evening, her youngest asked innocently, "Is Daddy coming back?" Marion paused, choosing truth without cruelty. "No," she said gently. "But we're okay." The child nodded, accepting it with the strange wisdom children sometimes possess. Daniel became an anchor in the house, not by asserting authority, but by modeling respect. He corrected the younger ones gently, helped with chores, and made jokes that lightened heavy moments. At one point, when the generator refused to start, he laughed and said, "Even Nipa knows when stress has left a house." Marion shook her head, smiling despite herself. Humor, she realized, was returning, not as a defense mechanism, but as evidence of healing. That weekend, Marion rearranged the living room completely. Not because it was necessary, but because reclaiming space felt symbolic. She moved the sofa Celine had sat on, repositioned chairs, opened windows wide. The house felt new, even though nothing had changed physically. Sometimes, change is not about removal, it's about ownership. And Marion, standing in the center of her living room, finally felt like the owner of her life again. Victor made several attempts to call. None of them were dramatic. Just missed calls. Short messages that said things like, "We need to talk," and "This got out of hand." Marion read them without emotion and did not reply. Silence, she had learned, was powerful when used intentionally. Daniel noticed the calls too, but said nothing. Victor was no longer a presence. He was a notification, easily dismissed. One evening, Victor drove past the house, but did not stop. He slowed, watching from the street, like a stranger surveying a place he once claimed. Lights were on. Laughter drifted faintly through an open window. The sight unsettled him more than anger ever could. The house was alive without him. Whole. He realized then that returning would require courage he no longer possessed, not courage to confront others, but courage to confront himself. And that was a debt he wasn't ready to pay. As Victor drove away, Marion closed the curtains from inside, unaware he had been there, and settled onto the sofa with a cup of tea. Daniel sat nearby, scrolling through his phone. The house was quiet, comfortable, safe. Outside, Victor disappeared into the night, not as a man wronged, but as a man who had finally met consequences that could not be argued with. Victor's days began to blur together in the unfamiliar places he now called temporary shelter. He moved from one friend's couch to another spare room, always careful not to stay too long, always aware that hospitality has a short patience for disgrace. People were polite but distant. Conversations avoided the obvious. No one asked how Marion was. No one invited him to talk about what really happened. Victor sensed it clearly. News had traveled, not loudly, but efficiently. The kind of news that doesn't need embellishment. The kind that reshapes how people look at you, without ever saying your name out loud. He started waking up earlier than necessary, not because he had somewhere to be, but because sleep offered too much time for memory. At night, regret arrived uninvited and overstayed its welcome. Victor replayed moments he once dismissed. Marion standing quietly in the kitchen, Marion fixing his collar before work, Marion laughing softly at jokes he no longer listened to. These memories now mocked him with their gentleness. He tried to distract himself with television, with phone calls, with plans that sounded convincing until silence exposed them as lies. The truth sat heavily on his chest. He had mistaken tolerance for weakness and patience for permission. And now, he had nowhere to place his apology without it sounding like noise. Once, in a moment of fragile courage, Victor practiced what he would say if Marion ever answered his calls. He spoke into the empty room, choosing words carefully, arranging remorse like furniture. But the speech collapsed midway, because apologies require acknowledgement, and Victor was still negotiating with himself about what he had done. The room offered no applause, no forgiveness, only quiet. And Victor, for the first time in his adult life, felt truly unimportant. Daniel returned to campus, carrying something heavier than books. He had defended his mother. Yes, but strength has consequences even when it is justified. He found himself quieter than usual, more reflective. Friends noticed the shift and teased him lightly, jokes about serious adulthood and old man energy. Daniel laughed along, but privately he was thinking deeply about the line between protection and rage. He didn't regret what he did, but he respected the power of it. And respect, he was learning, meant responsibility. One evening, Daniel called Marion and asked gently, "Are you okay?" Marion smiled into the phone. I'm better than okay, she replied. I'm peaceful. The words settled Daniel's thoughts. Peace. Not victory. Not revenge. Peace was the real outcome. That realization eased something in him. He had not destroyed a family. He had interrupted destruction. There was a difference, and it mattered. Daniel began channeling his intensity into discipline. He studied harder. He worked out regularly. He volunteered at a campus mentoring program, guiding younger students who reminded him of himself before life complicated things. Occasionally, humor crept back in. When a friend complained about relationship stress, Daniel joked, "Choose peace early, it's cheaper." The laughter that followed felt earned. Growth, Daniel understood, wasn't loud. It was consistent. The divorce proceedings moved quietly, almost respectfully. Victor did not contest. He did not dramatize. He signed papers with the subdued obedience of a man who understood his leverage was gone. Marion attended meetings calmly, dressed simply, speaking clearly. There were no emotional outbursts, no scenes worthy of gossip. The law did what law does best. It formalized an ending that had already occurred in spirit. When the judge finalized the process, Marion felt a surprising lightness. Not joy exactly, but relief, the kind that comes when a burden is set down after being carried too long. She stepped outside the courthouse and paused, taking in the ordinary sounds of traffic and footsteps. Life continued, unimpressed by endings. Marion found that comforting. She bought herself a small treat afterward, nothing extravagant, just a reminder that celebration doesn't need an audience. Victor did not attend the final meeting in person. He sent a representative. The absence spoke louder than anger ever could. Marion noticed it briefly, acknowledged it internally, and moved on. Closure, she realized, isn't something the other person gives you. It's something you take when you stop waiting. Celine kept her vow with remarkable discipline. She never returned to the house. Not once. Even when curiosity tempted her, fear outweighed it. She avoided streets near the compound, avoided mutual acquaintances, avoided any conversation that might circle back to that day. In her mind, the house had become a symbol not of love lost, but of danger misjudged. She told friends vague stories about family drama, and not worth the stress, carefully trimming details that made her look reckless. Eventually, Celine moved on, the way people often do when consequences don't follow them far enough. New city, new routine, new narratives. But there were moments, quiet, unguarded moments, when she remembered Daniel's voice, calm and final, and felt a chill. Some warnings don't need repetition. They settle into your bones and stay there. Victor tried to reach her months later, testing old familiarity. Celine did not respond. Whatever illusion had brought them together had shattered under reality. She had learned something expensive without paying money for it. Some homes are protected not by walls, but by resolve. And those are not places you trespass twice. Years passed, quietly and steadily. Marion transformed the house further, not out of bitterness, but intention. Fresh paint, new curtains, small renovations that reflected who she had become. Friends visited often. Laughter-filled rooms that once held tension. The house no longer felt like a place of endurance. It felt like a reward. Sometimes Marion caught herself smiling for no reason at all, and she welcomed it. Daniel graduated, standing tall, composed, grounded. Marion watched from the crowd, pride warming her chest. She thought back to the woman who once knelt in the dust picking tomatoes, and she felt no shame, only gratitude for survival. Life had not broken her. It had refined her. And humor, she discovered, was now effortless. When someone joked about strong women, Marion laughed and replied, "Strong, yes, but tired of nonsense." Somewhere else, Victor lived a quieter life, stripped of audience and authority. He was not hunted. He was not punished publicly. He was simply remembered correctly. And sometimes, that is the most fitting consequence of all. The house stood firm, filled with those who respected it. Marion moved forward without looking back. And the story ended not with noise, but with peace, the kind earned the hard way. Please like and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.